A win for the Dreamers. The US Supreme Court upholds protections for the children of undocumented immigrants. But will President Trump try again to reverse the policy? And how will this ruling shape the election just 5 months away? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. They're known as the Dreamers, the children of undocumented immigrants who sought a better life in the United States. And their American dream is safe for now. The Supreme Court has blocked the president's attempt to end a programme that protects them from deportation. The justices said Donald Trump's administration didn't follow proper legal procedure. It was the second Supreme Court ruling against the president this week, prompting an angry response from Trump on Twitter. We'll bring in our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Mike Hanna in Washington, D.C.
Jubilant crowds gathered outside the US Supreme Court. Many here are so-called Dreamers, the children of undocumented immigrants who are now assured of the right to residence for the foreseeable future. Between 700,000 and 800,000 people are affected by the Supreme Court decision.
I've had DACA since I was 15, 16 years old. It's allowed me to go to college. It's allowed me to get a full-time job. That could have all been stripped away had the court decided differently today.
Joining the celebrations was the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer.
This is just the beginning. You are going to become American citizens and great American citizens.
There was a vastly different reaction from a disgruntled president who lashed out on Twitter. "Do you get the impression that the Supreme Court doesn't like me?" he asked plaintively. These horrible and politically charged decisions coming out of the Supreme Court are shotgun blasts in the face of people that are proud to call themselves Republicans or conservatives, he continued. "We need more justices or we will lose our Second Amendment and everything else." In writing the majority decision, Chief Justice Roberts made clear he objected to administrative failures in the Trump legislation, not the policy itself. This is similar to the Trump travel ban that was rejected by the court for the same reasons, but then approved when it was reintroduced in an amended form. Theoretically, the administration's lawyers could redraft the repeal to address the court's concerns and then introduce it again. The only long-term guarantee of the Dreamers' rights is immigration reform in Congress.
We need real solutions. We need real relief from Congress and from all parties because that's the only way that we can get our path to citizenship and actually get full acknowledgement of all our contributions to this country.
This is a minimally acceptable program. And Congress cannot feel good about themselves that even throughout this entire period, they have failed to produce comprehensive immigration reform. So we are still going to continue to hold them accountable.
But that is all in the future. On this day, at this place, it's a time to celebrate, no matter how narrow the court's decision. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's bring in our panel. Joining us in New York, Vincent Warren, Executive Director at the Center for Constitutional Rights. In Alexandria, Virginia, Adolfo Franco, a Republican political strategist. And in Washington, D.C., Lara Brown, Director of the Graduate School of Political Management at George Washington University. A welcome to you all. Let's begin in Alexandria, Virginia, with Adolfo Franco. The U.S. president says, "The Supreme Court doesn't like me very much." However, the White House has come out the gate swinging. It said it's going to take this back to the Supreme Court, amended, and it's going to fight this. What chance do they have of getting it through?
Well, I think a very, very good chance. If you read this narrowly, of course, or you don't have to read it very narrowly, this is really a procedural decision. We can argue that, and I will in a moment, but the court did not suggest the DACA program in any way is something that is required. It's not law. Obviously, it was an executive order by President Obama. And in the past, executive orders are rescinded at will by incoming presidents or presidents themselves. What the procedural aspect of is the court has introduced a new concept here for really judicial involvement in these decisions of rescinding these orders in the future that says the Administrative Procedures Act, a procedural matter, was not followed when the president rescinded. Didn't question the president's authority to rescind the executive order. It's just the procedural aspect. Curiously, the Obama administration, when they promulgated the executive order, they didn't follow the same procedures. So it's a curious decision. I think it's a dangerous one. Executive orders are not law. And in fact, President Obama said in 2011, in April 2011, he didn't have the authority to resolve this matter in the way he ultimately did. He changed his mind for political reasons. So it's a disappointing decision. I think the White House has made it clear. The president has already tweeted that they will, quote unquote, do the paperwork and move forward. I can't see, since the court has pronounced this to be the way to do it, how they could now, if they comply with the procedures, which is simply say how they would dismantle the executive order, how the president does not have the authority to do it, because he clearly does.
We'll get to why it had to be amended once again. It's the second time the Trump administration has done that. But before we do, I want to bring in Vincent Warren here in New York. What can be done to stop the White House from taking this back to the Supreme Court? Can anything be done?
Well, first of all, it's important to note that as a result of that ruling, there are now 700,000 Dreamers, and these are children that have been brought to the United States who are undocumented, can now stay here. They can work. They can continue to lead their lives, many of whom have been here for 20, 30 years and don't know any other place. So that's an important aspect of this. You know, with respect to what the president can or cannot do, it is actually clear that the president does have authority, plenary authority in some ways, over our immigration system, who comes in, who goes out, who stays, and who doesn't. But we shouldn't confuse authority for justice. And what has been happening with this administration is that they have been using essentially immigration as a political tool to whip up the base. And so even knowing that they didn't do the procedures correctly, they see the benefit of, number one, saying we're going to remove these young people, these Dreamers, whether they win or lose. If they win, they lose. And if they feel like if they lose, they lose, because if they lose, they win, rather, because in the political context of the upcoming elections, they're whipping up the base. As a practical matter, yes, they can go back and do these procedures over again, and they likely will. And there's nothing that anybody can do to stop that process. We don't want a situation where, generally speaking, there are impediments on the president from moving forward to justify why they're starting or ending a program. That's a very important piece. However, you can expect lawsuits, and you can expect a lot of them. So as a practical matter, when they move this forward, there will be lawsuits, and it remains to be seen whether the Supreme Court or other courts will even get this case before November. This has been going on for a while, and this is 8 years ago that this program was put into place. So the Trump administration is really not thinking about good policy. They're not thinking about what makes sense for people in America. They're not thinking about what is fair and right for these young people that are working in our communities. They're thinking about 2020. And so they will make a lot of big moves and put this right back in the stream, and the lawsuits will happen again.
Actually, it's interesting. Let's talk about 2020. I want to bring in Lara Brown here from DC. Lara, we're looking at another election. We are looking at certainly some polls suggesting that Trump isn't as popular as he'd like to think he is. And then all of this is going on. He's had another fall at the Supreme Court. How much of an impact is all of this going to have on his re-election campaign?
Well, I think a lot will impact his re-election campaign. We do have to realize that the average of polls over this last month has shown that Vice President Joe Biden is leading Donald Trump by about 9 percentage points. Now, it is true that the polls can change, but it is also the case when you look at history that the polls at about this time of the year, in an election year, start to really suggest the general trends of where we're going to be in the final days. A lot of that obviously depends on events, and certainly some big events can change the polls quite dramatically. We might remember the recession in 2008 turned that race between John McCain and Barack Obama from being a close one to being a landslide in Barack Obama's favor. So it is the case that things can change, but there's no doubt President Trump has had a bad week. He's had Supreme Court decisions go against his and his party's wishes. And he has also had a former advisor be releasing a book that is scathing of Trump's leadership.
Adolfo Franco in Alexandria, Virginia. The essence of Trump's campaign, the essence of Trump's administration has always been built. Certainly one of the planks is immigration. To get this so badly wrong, so close to the election, is a very big tactical mistake, is it not?
Well, I don't think he's gotten it wrong at all. Just as your other guest who mixed up law and politics here a bit, I was trying to address the legal issues. First of all, as he acknowledged, the president has the authority, and this executive order, certainly if he is reelected, will be rescinded. It's a procedural bump in the road. That's all that's going to be. But curiously, again, President Obama exceeded his authority. I think the executive order is illegal. Now, you can't mix that up with there's 700,000 people. You're either applying the law or you're applying circumstances of what's going on. This is the first time ever a court has ever given an opinion about individuals and ignoring really the black letter law here. The President Obama said, I don't have the authority, and he was right. He doesn't have the authority to legislate, and that's what this was about. Of course, President Trump in 2018 had put forward a proposal to resolve this before the Congress, and it's the Democrats who want to keep this issue very much alive. Republicans would like to resolve it. I think there's a unanimous view in the Republican Party that we need to do something about DACA legislatively, and that was blocked in 2018 by the Democrats. So I see it completely different than the other guests. I think this is the Democrat talking point for sure. Lastly, on the polls, with all due respect, at this time, exactly, she said, the other guest said that these pretty much gel or move the direction. She's right. Anything could change positively or negatively. At this precise time, and I did this before this program, 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton was ahead in all of the swing states the president carried by a wider margin than President Trump is behind today. In other words, President Trump is in better shape than he was 4 years ago vis-a-vis Hillary. In the states that count, in our country, national polls, frankly, are meaningless. So if that's the test, it's a curious test, since that didn't pan out in 2016, and I don't think it'll pan out this year. There is a large number of the electorate that are going to vote for Donald Trump that aren't telling pollsters they're voting for Donald Trump. That's my opinion.
Vincent Warren in New York, Adolfo Franco actually says this is a procedural bump in the road.
Well, one thing we can agree on, Adolfo and I, is that this is a procedural decision. It doesn't rule on the validity of the program. It rules on the posture that this administration took. But there are some important points that are here. And we talked earlier about mixing politics and law. And I think there's no better example of this than looking at the president's tweets themselves. After this decision, the president said, quote, these horrible and politically charged decisions coming out of the Supreme Court are shotgun blasts into the face of people that are proud to call themselves Republicans and conservatives. Now, what's interesting about this is that, number one, President Trump, of course, ran on the immigration piece. That's his signature piece, and it does hurt both politically and legally for him to get this decision from the Supreme Court. But he also spent a lot of time talking about how he was going to reshape the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary. And to his word, he has put in place many federal judges. But what's telling is that as soon as he gets a ruling against him, the first thing that he is doing is attacking the courts. He's saying that these are politically charged rulings from the Supreme Court, when Adolfo and I would very much agree that these are procedural rulings that have political impact. And I think that's very important for us moving forward. And I think it suggests a dangerous trend with this president, which is that when he loses, and make no mistake, he lost and lost big here, that he starts attacking the structures that made the decision, calling them politically charged, politically incorrect, calling the judges corrupt, calling any system that's there unfair. And these are dog whistles to his base. And I understand the political elements of this, but it is also very dangerous in this time because we've seen over the last several years of his presidency that people are very much moved to violence against these institutions when the president downplays them. And that's a big problem.
Let's bring in Lara Brown here. Lara, these are dog whistles. This is President Trump going after the Supreme Court for his base. Is his base going to get energized by things like this, or is there simply a fatigue now from people that may have voted for him before and may be on the fence right now?
Well, I think what's very interesting is we do see the president continuing to stoke his base with his rhetoric and his actions. The problem for him is that his base is already about as enthusiastic as it can get. So the problem for him going forward is that he is not in a position to be able to attract independents or even some weak Democrats who are displeased with the Democratic choices that they have had. And he is not in a place where he can bring those people over to his side because all of his rhetoric is really about playing to the base. And this is where we see in the polls what is fascinating is that his base is very enthusiastic to support him. According to the most recent Fox poll, 63% say they're excited to vote for him. But interestingly, 63% of Democrats say that they are afraid of Trump winning. So their fear about his winning is actually what's motivating the Democrats. And most of our research on this in political science shows that fear and frustration and anger are oftentimes a greater predictor of turnout and motivation than, in fact, positive support or enthusiasm.
So, Adolfo, Franco, there is this idea then that the base is energized by things like this, by his words. They'll get out the vote, they'll try and get out the vote. But there's a moral issue here and there's a justice issue here as well. These people have been in the country for maybe 20, in some cases 20, 30 years. There is a moral issue here. The US actually does owe these people certainly justice, if not the ability to stay, surely.
Well, a couple of things. First, no one is suggesting that we don't want to resolve the DACA issue. The president has been talking about it and wants to do it legislatively. Again, I have a different view. I think the Democrats have been playing politics for this for a very long, long time. We've tried for I worked for John McCain. We tried for many years to get immigration reform. And we actually had the stumbling block many years ago from, of all people, Barack Obama. So this is a nice liberal talking point, but the problem is one of law and morality, but one of legislation. We need to have this done legislatively. Curiously, when the Democrats had supermajorities, 60 senators in the Senate under Barack Obama's administration, they did nothing about it. So I don't know where their morality was at the time. On this base issue, though, I want to just comment on this. Base, Republican base, or the Democrat base. You I was talking about your other guest that there's only a Democrat, a Trump base. Of course, there's a Democrat base, and they're being stoked, and they're being, I think, from with extremism, with what's going on in the country now, with I think the outrageous attack on police and so forth. You had the Attorney General of Massachusetts saying that you have to burn the forest, referring to looting, before you can rebuild. And you had Councilwoman Democrat in Seattle saying, I don't know why people are so bothered about looting. That's not an incitement to violence. So it's curious how the press really gets away with, these Democrats get away with the most outrageous comments when the president makes comments nothing other than to simply say he wants to apply the laws of the United States. Clearly that executive order is illegal. Clearly that executive order, which should never have been issued, those were Barack Obama's own words, and it's a dangerous precedent that's been set, including by even the procedural aspect. I'm quite troubled by what the court has done. So this has all been done for politics from the other side. The last thing I will say about the polls, since this was conveniently forgotten here, the enthusiasm factor among Republicans, if you're calling the Republicans the base, go ahead, then the Democrats are a base. Among Republicans, the enthusiasm factor is much, much higher than it is for Joe Biden, who has zero enthusiasm. And secondly, and I think this is an important point to be made, is those individuals that are likely to vote, more registered voters and so forth, favor the Republican Party. So I think I hope they're overconfident. I hope they continue with the strategy they've pursued, because I think ultimately the president, we'll see how his rally goes in Oklahoma, and that will be a reflection of where I think the level of enthusiasm you're going to see for his reelection.
Lara Brown in DC, I see that you want to make a comment. Please, go ahead.
I do. There are a few comments I want to make. First, it's important to realize that, which hasn't been brought up, that executive orders do carry the force of law while that president or that executive is in office and until they have been rescinded. So there's been some suggestion that somehow executive orders are not legitimate governing tools. They just are temporary governing tools. And the Supreme Court's decision in this case is saying, essentially, as we've discussed, that there is a procedural problem with the way the Trump administration put forward their rescission, if you will. And I think what is important to realize is, practically speaking, this will not be decided before the election. And what the Supreme Court did wasn't make a curious decision. They did something that is historically quite standard for them. They threw the political problem back to the people and back to the Congress. And so this idea that the court was getting political or personal with the president is just simply wrong. The court was looking for a way to put this back into the legislative branch, and they have put it to the people, and it will be part of the test of this election. Second, I just need to say something quickly about the polls. Secondly, when it comes to the polls, it's really important to realize that the majority of Americans are both with the protesters and they are, in fact, against the president. So there is a reality that the Republicans can talk about how great their Republican base is, but it has no breadth. It is a very small group of people at the moment, hovering around 39–40%, that are consistently siding on the president's views on just about everything. And so what we see here is that the majority of Americans are looking for change, and they are about to exact a referendum, a negative one, on this president's administration.
Adolfo, just very quickly, we are running out of time, but I do want your response. Quickly, what's your response?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, let me start with the last point. I'm curious if your guest predicted Donald Trump's election in 2016. I think this is just, frankly, completely baseless speculation and hopeful thinking. This isn't a small number of people, and the polls in the swing states don't reflect that, and we'll see how things happen.
That's not true.
American people are not.
It's simply not true.
Let me finish. I didn't interrupt you. The American people are not with the rioters. They're not with the looters, and they're with the police. And the other side is advancing an agenda to defund the police. On the Supreme Court, I have to make some clarifications. I asked your guest, Laura, to see President Obama's own comments in April of 2011 about his authority. An executive order, this isn't about the illegality of executive orders, they're issued all the time. There was an underlying statute and law, and President Obama correctly initially said that he had the authority through an executive order to implement the law, but not to make the law. And in this case, he made the law. So the Supreme Court needed to strike this down because it was an illegal executive order in the first instance. And secondly, again, even on the procedural aspect, if you get to that, the Obama administration did not follow the Administrative Procedures Act. And now it's being applied to President Trump, that he has to follow it to rescind an order. So this is a lot of red herrings here on both the polling, on both wishful thinking about the election, and more importantly, the legalities of what has happened here. The executive
I'm afraid
order
we
itself,
are running. I'm afraid we are out of time. I want to say it's a very spirited debate. I want to thank all of our guests, Vincent Warren, Adolfo Franco, and Lara Brown, and thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.